Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to our EFSPI regulatory workshop. It's the 8th edition already, and I'm very happy to see so many of you in the room. And before we kick off with the content, I will tell you a little bit more about EFSPI, because people always ask what is actually EFSPI. And EFSPI is the European Federation of Statisticians in the Pharmaceutical Industry. And as you might know, we are the black screen. I need help. We are an umbrella organization, so there is no individual participation possible in EFSPI, but we represent 10 statistical associations in Europe. And this is important because with that, we represent more than 2,000 statisticians in Europe. What is also important, we are a non-profit organization that was established really 3 decades ago, so in 1992. And we are growing and growing, which is, I think, a great possibility to show and influence policymakers, but also to, have something that is sustainable for the future. And Kaspar is helping me now with my slides.
Not sure yet.
But I can do it also without. What is really important to us that we have very clear objectives. And the objectives are to really shape the standards of statistical, to shape the standards of how we do statistics in pharma, but also how we collaborate with each other, with academia, with regulators. What is also important to us, now it's working, maybe it's working. What is also important to us, as you can see here, that we really represent the 10 statistical associations. And as just said, we promote professional standards of statistics and the standing of us in the pharmaceutical industry. We also collaborate a lot with academia and with authorities. So this triad is super important to us. The regulatory statistics workshop is one of the main pillars of our daily business, I would say. So we have clear priorities to focus on our business continuity, which is also the regulatory statistics workshop. We want to enhance our visibility and, as I said, shaping policy making. And we want to transform into an organization that is not just something great today, but also for the future. And here it's really close to my heart to enhance once again that we are growing and we are connecting with academia and with regulatory authorities, and we include more and more people from the next generation. As you can see here, we were here last year. We will be hopefully here also next year. And I want to really wish you a great start into this workshop and give you also some statistics. These numbers are from yesterday, so they are already outdated. When I looked at them today morning, we have over 800 participants. Most of them are registered online, but you see the full room here. We have almost 300 people here in person. Most of them are from pharma, but we have more than 70 regulators. We have also some people from academia. We have people from all over the world, from more than 30 countries. And we don't have only statisticians in the room. We also have clinicians. We have colleagues from regulatory affairs, which is really great. I want to thank you for coming. But most of all, I want to thank Helle for the great preparation of the workshop. I know you did not do it alone, but with a great scientific committee and with the local organizers. But I know how many efforts and how many hours you spent to prepare this workshop. So a big, big thank you to you. And we have a super exciting agenda. You can look at the agenda again. You have some of you have it in front of you. Some others can look at this online again. And Last but not least, I want to remind you, especially those colleagues who are in the US or are traveling to the US, we have a partner workshop in the US in 2 weeks. And here we also decided as EFSPI that we will collaborate more and more. So you will see colleagues here, but we will also see colleagues from EFSPI attending their regulatory workshop in the US. And with that, I wish you all the best. Exciting 2 days. Please follow us on LinkedIn. We will post some content also during the next 2 days. And I hope we will have a lot of time to talk to each other, exchange, have great discussions, and have fun together also in this workshop. While getting ready for the first session, I was asked to say a few words on how you connect to the Wi-Fi on your computer. You should connect to the Unibus visitor option on your Wi-Fi. Then you should start a browser and go to the welcome page. Then you should click on Hier geht's weiter or continue. And then change the language to English if that is what you prefer. And then if you don't have a code yet, maybe you have one from the Zen meeting just recently, but if you don't have one, you should click on a link called If you don't have a login yet. Then you should state your mobile number, and then you will receive a text message with a code, and you should type that code into the welcome page. And then you should be good to go, I hope.
Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone attending this session. My name is Khadija Rantel. I'm from the Medicine and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency. I'm a statistical assessor, and with me is Vivian.
Hi, good morning. My name is Vivian Lanius. I'm from Bayer. And before we get started, Khadija opens the session. Just a little bit of a reminder regarding housekeeping. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session, so we will not have any questions between the presentations. So please save your questions at the very end, and we will ask the speakers and Christine to come back to stage or turn on the camera. And also, again, to the people joining online, please put your questions into the Q&A and not into the chat. So with that, Khadija, please open the session.
Thank you, Vivian. As we know, digitalization and health technology, the availability of health technology, real-world data are changing the landscape of clinical development and the way we generate evidence. In addition, we know that bringing new medicines to patients is dependent on two processes. The first one is gaining marketing authorization from regulatory bodies, and the second is the reimbursement, hence the very important role of health technology assessment bodies. And in this session, we have three fantastic speakers representing both the regulatory bodies as well as the HTA. And with that, I'll hand over to Vivian to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker, and it's my pleasure to announce, is Christine Carlson, who's presenting virtually. She has almost 20 years of experience as a pharmacometrician in the community with special expertise in modeling and simulations, gained at academic research, industry, and also regulatory agencies. Since 2016, she is a pharmacometrician PK assessor at the Swedish Medical Products Agency. And she has been an active member of several working groups and working parties. Just to name a few: the Modeling and Simulation Working Party, the ICH M11 on model-informed drug development, ICH 11A, pediatric extrapolation, and also the Pediatric Committee, where she has been the Swedish delegate in the last year. And now she's vice chair of the newly formed EMA Methodology Working Party, and she will give us an update on these activities now. Over to you, Christine.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to give the presentation. And I apologize that I could not be there in person. So I will give you a little bit of an update on the methodology working party. Kit gave you an introduction last year, I think, but we'll see what happened since then. And we'll see if I can move my slides. There we go. And the usual disclaimer. It's my own views mostly. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of background that there was a reorganization of the working parties at EMA and other groups as well. And it was organized now, it is now organized into 5 domains. At the top of the hierarchy, we have a scientific coordination board that is coordinating the CHMP, so the Human Committee, and also the Veterinary Committee, CBMP. And under the Human Committee, we now have 4 domains, so a quality domain, a non-clinical safety domain, a methodology domain, and a clinical domain. And then on the veterinary side, there's a veterinary domain. So these are the main areas where the working parties are organized into. And from our perspective, we then constitute the methodology domain. And the methodology domain is a merge, or there's a lot of different disciplines included in the methodology domain. So it's pharmacokinetics, PK, and clinical pharmacology, biostatistics, modeling and simulation, real-world evidence, artificial intelligence, diagnostics, pharmacogenomics, and data science, and other adjacent disciplines. So by merging all these together, we now have a working party, where we have representation from these domains or these disciplines. But as you can imagine, we have now 21 members in the methodology working party, and those 21 members represent the different disciplines, but we can of course not do all the work ourselves or even represent all the different experts and expert areas that would be needed. So we have this, we can call it methodology working party and friends, where we have an expanded network of experts which will support the methodology working party work. So we have the methodology working party as a hub in the middle, which is the blue circle in this figure. And then we have smaller or other circles on the outside, which represent the different disciplines. So we have biostatistics as a little bit larger circle because it is a large part of our work. We have AI and data science, real world evidence, and then we have modeling and simulation, clinical pharmacology, pharmacogenomics, and other potential expert areas. And these groups can then be organized a little bit in smaller groups depending on what their task will be. So you can have drafting groups, which will provide and write guidance documents of various sorts, Q&As and guidelines and reflection papers. We also have operational expert groups, which are supposed to more support specific procedures or operating more ongoing support to the committees. But there's a large pool of experts in the regulatory network in Europe, and we call that now European Specialized Expert Community for methodology, which a lot of the regulatory colleagues or the methodology colleagues at different national agencies have joined, and there's a continuous possibility to join the ESEC to be part of this pool of experts that will support the work. There's a lot of work that is going on and will go on. As you know, there's been a hold on a lot of things at EMA and in the network due to the pandemic, and also previously due to the move from London. So it's we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need this large group of people that can support the methodology work. So with that, I will go into a bit more on our work plan. So we have some strategic goals, and for one thing, a very important part is the operational support, and that is to CHMP, the Human Committee, but also to other committees like PDCO, the Pediatric Committee, and others, and also to the Scientific Advice Working Party. And this operational support is then focused on products and specific procedures. Another important part is then guidance documents. It's a structured, we need to have a structured plan for the development of guidance documents, which ones are prioritized or not. As I said, there's been a hold for a while, so there's a lot of work that needs to happen, but there's also limited resources as there are everywhere. And we also need to think about what we need to know now, and where we really need to communicate our opinion, and also what we will need in the future. So what is coming, and where do we need to be sort of alert? Other aspects, and this will engage a wider group of people, so more of the network, is knowledge building. And then we need to share learnings from assessments of ongoing procedures and products. We also need to formulate training and development of the whole network for new, and also for new areas and for new guidelines. We also need to have a good expertise network, so a good network within the different national agencies, but also with academia to support our work, and to for us to gain knowledge. And we also want to be a global leader. We want to work with international regulatory partners in ICH and cluster meetings, for examples, and be a leading voice in global collaborations. So those are the main strategic goals that we have in our work plan, and I will go into a little bit more detail on the work plan now. So one of the main areas of our work plan is then guidelines. It's structured into under four main areas. It's clinical pharmacology, which includes specific bioequivalence products, or for specific products. Modeling and simulation is also categorized under clinical pharmacology, and there we foresee, for example, Q&A documents and trainings. Real-world evidence, there we have AI is in our work plan sorted under real-world evidence, and we have a reflection paper on AI that just came out. Clinical trial modernization, which is large parts of the biostatistics area. So it's implementation of ICH guidance, but also working on trials for the future and new guidelines that are needed for new clinical trial. And then we have pharmacogenomics and diagnostics, and there's a new legislation for the in vitro diagnostics that we need to be attentive to, and there's a few guidelines that needs updating in that area as well. So those are the sort of four main pillars, but there's overlap between these pillars, of course, but that's how it's organized at the moment. So some of the activities that we have worked on the last year has now become published. So we earlier this year, we published a reflection paper regarding establishing efficacy based on single-arm trials, and you will hear more about that later during this meeting, but here's the link to to the reflection paper, and the public consultation is open for a few more weeks until September 30th. And we also recently published a reflection paper of the use of artificial intelligence in the life cycle of medicines. And that reflection paper, the consultation is open until 31st of December. And there are also some other or a lot of other activities ongoing and planned in terms of guidelines. I've just pulled out a few here that I thought would be of most relevance for this audience. There is a concept paper on the use of real-world evidence for regulatory decision-making that is will come out fairly soon. We're also working on a roadmap for development of real-world evidence guidance. And in terms of clinical trial modernization, we're working on the revision of guideline on multiplicity issues in clinical trials, revision of guideline on the non-inferiority margin, and the possibility and possibly the guideline on switching between superiority and non-inferiority. We have planned for a reflection paper on Bayesian methods in clinical development and a reflection paper on platform trials. So that's what's ongoing and planned. So we're going over to another part of our working plan is trainings, which is very important for us gaining knowledge, but also to train the network. And so we need to have a sort of a core good foundation on methodology and advances and state-of-the-art methodology, and also reflect on hot new topics so that we are sort of on our toes in advice and so on. We also need to have trainings on all new finalized guidelines. And we will work closely with the EU NTC platform to share the trainings. And we also foresee a comprehensive curricula in the data science, biostatistics, modeling, simulation, and epidemiology, with close liaison with Big Data Steering Group and EMA and some other initiatives that are going on in the EU regulatory space. Another very important pillar in our work plan is stakeholder engagement, as we are doing right now. And there we foresee some industry stakeholder engagement individually and as a group. We also will have engagement with global regulators, again, both individually, and with that I mean individually, not with a specific company or a specific regulator mainly, but individual in specific expert areas. So for biostatistics and for modeling and simulation and clinical pharmacology. So it will not always be the just methodology working party, but for specific expert areas as well. And also in EU projects, which include ACT EU and Big Data Steering Groups, for example. And then we have some upcoming activities of interest. We have the revision of the methodology working plan coming up. So we have worked now for a bit over a year, and we have sort of seen now what's coming and how we should constitute ourselves. So we will do a revision of the work plan this fall. There's also an AI workshop coming up the 20th and 21st of November at EMA. And we are also in the planning of a stakeholder meeting, which will focus on the revised work plan, and that is coming up in December, and we'll let you know when that comes closer. And that was all I had prepared, and I know we're taking questions later. I was a bit faster than I anticipated, unusual, but I'm happy to take questions after the other presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your nice and clear talk on that update. Our next speaker will be Eftichia Psarelli. Eftichia is a statistician on secondment at EMA since 2020. And she's actually an active member of this methodology domain workstream in the Data and Analytics and Methods Task Force. There she's managing EMA's raw data project, focusing on utilizing raw data to generate evidence for better and more efficient regulatory decision-making. Before she worked at EMA, she spent 8 years as a senior statistician at the Liverpool Clinical Trial Center, where she gained strong experience in clinical data, trial design and analytics. The talk today will be an update on this raw data pilot. So thank you very much. Over to you, Eftichia.
Hello, okay, it's working. So while Caspar is preparing the slide deck, so thank you again for inviting me to present. So today the focus of my talk would be to give you an update on the ongoing proof of concept pilot. So EMA is exploring the submission of individual patient data from clinical trials in order to collect learnings and explore if there is any regulatory benefit. Just maybe I'll sit here. No? Where do I have to? I have to be here, yeah? Oh. Yep. Okay, so this is the famous disclaimer slide. I have been introduced already. So in terms of the structure of my talk, I will first, of course, introduce you how this project, was born within EMA. And then the approach we took on designing these proof of concept pilots. And because I would like to focus to the, let's say, most of the audience today are from industry, I also wanted to focus on my talk regarding the interaction we had with industry during this effort, the guidance we have developed, and it's available online. Before I share with you a status update, so where we are up to with the pilot, I will also share some, let's say, initial learnings, and I'll close with present to you what's coming next. So, of course, when we start a big project, we need a sponsor. So the project stems from the joint HMA-EMA Big Data Steering Group, and it was built in order to assist with the recommendation that is like at the bottom left. So there was a recommendation from this group to support the network in their capability to analyze big data. So for this reason, in the current work plan, you can also find the section where it says that we will engage in performing proof of concept pilots in order to collect learnings that we can then present to the network, and then they can take the decision on the place, the future place of analysis of raw data into regulatory decision making. Of course, this is also the proof of concept pilots are also included in the CHMP's work plan. And to also link on what Christine presented to you before, EMA's methodology working party are also recognizing this effort, and they're recognizing the importance of this project, and they have also included in their work plan that they will engage with us in order to collect these learnings. I will now move on with setting up some definitions. So I know some of you in the audience might not agree with you, but what we have decided to define as raw data within the context of our project So when we use the term of raw data or individual patient data or patient level data, we mean any data, including imaging one, that is directly accessible in terms of reanalysis or additional analysis. So it's the data that comes in electronic structure format, such as the CDISC ADAM and the SDDM format. So the raw data project at EMA, I've already somehow mentioned it. So it was set up in order to assess if there is any added value, if there is any added benefit into having, this data in-house, analyzing it, and then perhaps we wanted to find if this supports a bit further or improves our regulatory decision making. So the idea was to explore, collect these learnings, and then we present this to the key decision regulatory bodies, and then they will be the ones deciding if this will be, the way ahead. How we will do that? So we will first need to perform some, pilots in order to collect these learnings. And of course, because we're dealing with, sensitive data, the project team is making sure that all the safeguards to process this data are in place and they are according to the data protection legislation. So looking a bit closer on what is this pilot about. So I hope you all know that it was launched like a year ago in September 2022. So we are halfway there. So we are planning during this pilot to receive raw data from 10 regulatory procedures. And we are doing this in a stepwise approach. So we're not, looking at the 10 altogether, step by step. In terms of the type of applications that are eligible, these are initial marketing authorization applications, but also post-authorization ones, so variations or extensions. So, and what we've tried to do also, we try to be opportunistic. So we haven't set any, let's say, restriction when it comes to the clinical characteristics of the dossier that we will accept raw data. Another important aspect is that participation is voluntarily, and this applies to, let's say, all bodies involved, all sides involved. So the applicant or the marketing authorization holder voluntarily, submits, provides us with their data. Of course, they have to sign like some forms. But also the CHMP rapporteurs, they're also voluntarily participating and accepting to work together with the team and the applicant into looking closely into this data. When it comes to the data standards, we haven't changed anything. So we are accepting the SDDM, as you see, the CD standards, as the other international regulatory bodies do. So no, let's say, additional work from the applicant on this side. And so we have, assuming we have, chosen our procedure, we have received the data. So during the pilot, the CHMP assessment teams are the ones that they will decide which analyses are to be conducted, and this analysis will be conducted to address some of, let's say, questions the rapporteurs have. So if such analysis take place, this is of course shared with the applicant via the assessment report. And worth noting that sometimes the applicant might be requested to replicate the analysis we performed during the pilot. And this again will be done using the usual procedures we have. So for example, via the list of questions document. And lastly, when it comes to who is actually, conducting this raw data analysis, we thought also to, inform the future decision making that it will be important to explore different, let's say, scenarios. So for some of these 10 procedures, it is the rapporteur assessment teams that are actually conducting the raw data analysis and visualization. For some others, it is the EMA, so we analyze the data in-house. But also we are exploring the other option of using an EMA contractor. So we have run a procurement, and this procurement was won by a member of the network, actually. So it's the Danish Medicines Agency who is actually analyzing the data in terms of our EMA's contractor. So it's acting as our contractor in this pilot. So, as I said before, I would like a bit to spend some time into explain to you how we interacted, with the industry. Of course, industry is impacted. Of course, we cannot do this project without the applicants, voluntarily, providing this data. So, in order to strengthen our collaboration and also promote the dialogue between the two sides, we have established last summer an industry focus group on raw data. So this group consists of representatives from different, industry and industry associations. I have a slide later on if you want to see more detail who is there. And this gave the opportunity to the members of this group to also provide their, let's say, guidance and advise their views on some key pilot aspects. So what we did, so we have approached this group, and we have shared with them the guidance we have been preparing for industry. So, and we have asked them to review it and spot any, for example, gaps we might have. We have also engaged in a dialogue with them regarding the application of EMA's transparency principle during the raw data pilot. And I will focus to this specific document a bit more later in my talk. But something else that is very important, we have consulted this group when it comes to the pilot's outcomes. So we have asked them what will be important for them in terms of learnings to collect. This is just a slide to show you the different members, where are they coming from, and their associations they're being representing. And of course, it's not only, we're not only interacting with industry via this group. The engagement is continuous, as with all our rest of our stakeholders. So I've tried to list here some fora, some meetings, some places where we go to provide regular updates on the raw data pilot. Of course, the list is not exhaustive. I couldn't fit everything in one slide, but just to mention that we regularly attend and provide updates using our sponsors. So we're going to the Big Data Steering Group and industry stakeholders meetings. They're happening twice a year. We also regularly present in the industry stakeholder platform on the operation of the centralized procedure for human medicines. And actually, we have presented around 2 or 3 times. We have co-presented actually together with members of the industry focus group or data. So, both, let's say, voices are heard. And I would like to draw to your attention that we try in almost every issue of the big data highlights and the clinical trial highlights. So these are like newsletter letters that they are publicly available out there. So we always try to include an article about the stage of the pilot, or if anything, important learnings are there. So you can subscribe to these newsletters, and it's a nice way to be kept updated. So regarding the guidance for industry, of course, since our launch, we have published information for the pilot, so the industry can have a look, on the scope and what this entails, and we regularly, of course, update it. We have also developed a Q&A document. So we try to cover not only, theoretical, let's say, aspects about what is the pilot about and who can take part, but we also try to include some more, let's say, technical details about, okay, how we'll submit the data, in which format, etc. So this document was also updated this year in March 2023. So please have a look. Of course, you can find on EMA's Big Data website the pilot participation letter and the raw data submission cover letter for the applicant when they provide us with the data. And as I previously said, we have performed an extensive data protection impact assessment before we were able to receive this data at EMA. And you can find all relevant documentation, including the data protection notice and the records of the data processing in the website. And lastly, I have devoted, let's say, a couple of slides to the last document, which was the one we developed following, I would say, some, let's say, concerns raised from industry regarding the application of EMA's transparency principles to the raw data proof of concept pilot. So I tried here to extract the most important, let's say, aspects of this document and present them to you. So the application of policy 43 to the raw data pilot, of course, applies. So any types of documents that EMA hosts can be subject to a request to data access. So this goes without saying, and it goes without saying that this will include individual patient data that is submitted to us during the pilot. Very important to note that if we receive such a request, access to this document, of course, won't be permitted while the relevant pilot procedure, let's say ongoing regulatory procedure, it's ongoing. So we're never gonna provide access to these documents. EMA, as it always does, will always consult the third party involved regarding the possible presence, for example, of CCIs, of commercially confidential information, and also the same for personal data, and will, of course, redact and anonymize both of these data as necessary. And finally, I would like to remind the audience that already EMA regularly receives individual patient data. So we receive this in PDF listings, so the CAMAs, patient data listings. And we regularly receive requests of access to patient data listings. So this is something we are already doing, and we are already, following consultation with the applicant, we anonymize and we make it available to the requester. When it comes to the application of the clinical data publication, so also known as policy 70, so the individual patient data won't be considered. So it will only be considered under the phase 2 of the policy 70, which has yet to start. And just to remind you about the policy 70, so this the first phase of the policy 70's relaunch has started this month. And if you're also interested to find out more, if you haven't heard back then, we have hosted a webinar back in May going through the plans of this relaunch. And finally, what is also included in this document is that we, of course, follow the application of Union Data Protection legislation, so EU DPR and GDPR, when it comes to the data we receive in the raw data pilot. And I've said to you before, we have a lot of data protection documentation available on the website if you want to have a look. So, okay, we launched the pilot, so you now might ask me, where are you up to in terms of pilot procedures, and what can you share already regarding the learning? So I will try to do so with my next slides. So, so far, the team has been busy into exploring the more than 30 candidate pilot procedures. So this happened within a year's time. So we have included 5 in our pilot. So there are currently 5, let's say, running. And we're also currently investigating other 4 pilot procedures. So I'm sure we're all statisticians here. So if you do the math, you will see that around 20 had to be excluded. And I don't know if I have time, maybe I can already verbally say why we had to exclude, some of these procedures. So it varies. So sometimes we might have an interesting applicant coming to the raw data pilot with a specific, proposal. Then we had to reach out to the relevant rapporteur, but the rapporteur, for example, wasn't interested into that procedure. So we always need, to find, let's say, a match. In some other instances, it was the industry that they didn't want to participate. Sometimes they said you to resource. Sometimes they didn't provide a reason, or sometimes it happened that although both sides had agreed, the applicant for some reasons had to withdraw or had to postpone the submission. So these are some high-level reasons. So if we look closer at the green, let's say, square on the 5 included so far, so you can see that we have a variety in terms of type and, let's say, therapeutic area. So we have an initial marketing authorization. It's a new active substance in the area of neurology. We have a biosimilar in endocrinology. We also have 2 type 2 variations, one in oncology, one in dermatology. And the latest one is an initial marketing authorization. It's a new active substance in the area of gastroenterology. Focus of the analysis of raw data is on benefit risk. However, we're also exploring modeling and simulation analysis. And in terms of, let's say, some initial learnings, I can already share that so far the collaboration with the applicants and the marketing authorization holders has been excellent. So all the interaction we had to prepare, for the official pilot participation and also to prepare the data submission was very smooth between the 2 bodies concerned. What I can also share with you so far are some learnings on the data access and analysis. So the submission of the data comes as the dossier, so nothing changed to that. So it still happens via the gateway and the CTD. However, of course, because now we're receiving raw data, we have also introduced a data submission meeting that takes place. And I'm sure you're aware of that because something similar takes place with other international regulators when you submit the data. The raw data we have received so far, it complies with CD standards. So our contractor has used Pinnacle 21 to validate the data we receive. The export transport file formats are accepted, so no changes here. So what you already submit to PMD and FDA. And the data definition files in CDISC XML format are required. And in terms of software, we are exploring. So so far we have been using SAS and R when it comes to statistical analysis. We have also explored using SAS Jump Clinical to do graphs, for visualizations. And for modeling and simulation software, we are exploring to use wide known softwares like the Monolix and the GastroPlus. So in terms of what's next, I try to focus on the short, let's say, term milestones, important milestones we have, and you might be interested. So as I've mentioned a lot of times, so we're doing this pilot to collect learnings. And I said we're halfway there. So our interim, let's say, pilot report, we're planning to have it ready early next year. So we're collecting these interim learnings, and this won't only be on the benefit, to the regulatory assessment of having raw data, but also it will include learnings on some practical aspects, like, for example, the different operating scenarios, the capacity and capability from the network side to analyze, or from the other scenarios to analyze, and also any technical, let's say, challenges or demands we have not foreseen. It goes without saying that feedback will be sought from all stakeholders involved. And this also includes the applicants and the marketing authorization holders that provided us with their data, and we will do so via surveys. So we have already designed this, and this is where we have also consulted the industry focus group on raw data. And once we have compiled this report, we are also planning to draft a summary of this report. We will be, and we're trying to, we will make it available online, so it will be published on EMA's website. So for anyone that is interested to have a look at it, Of course, we will also plan some, let's say, mini webinars or info sessions. So we'll also give the opportunity to interested to also attend this and ask any questions they might have. And lastly, just to manage expectations, of course, we should bear in mind that during this time in early 2024, most of the pilot procedures will still be ongoing. So we'll bear this in mind, and of course, not share any information that the applicant is not feeling comfortable with. And something we will also do, we're planning also to share this report summary first with our pilot, the applicants that participated in the pilot, again, to make sure there is understanding and acceptance of what is going to be shared publicly. And this is my last slide. So there is still time for industry if you're interested to participate in the proof of concept pilot, or in case you have any questions, I've put on the screen the Road Pilot's mailbox. You can reach out to us. And for the time being, until the interim lessons learned are ready, we are in the position to accept the submissions up to the first quarter of 2024. So if you have a submission by this time, you're still eligible to take part. We'll see that changes after the publication of the interim pilot report, but for the moment, this is the timeline we're working with. And I think, yeah, this is where I have 1 minute left. So this is where I stop. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tichia, for an excellent talk. And with that, I would like to welcome our third speaker, David McConnell. Perhaps just that one. David McConnell is a statistician and senior health technology assessor at the National Center for Pharmacoeconomics. David holds a PhD in mathematics from the Trinity College Dublin and previously held lectureship at the University of Glasgow, Cardiff, and Cardiff University. He joined the National Center for Pharmacoeconomics in 2019. His role involves evaluating statistical methodology, evidence synthesis, and economic modeling in health technology assessment submissions, as well as conducting research and developing guidelines for best practices in these areas. He is a member of the Methodology and Procedures subgroup of the HTA coordinating group and contributed to the development of the UNETA 21 methodological guideline and joint scientific consultation. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Point at this, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you. So, yeah, thank you for the introduction, and indeed, thank you for the invitation to speak here. I'm going to talk a bit about, give an update on the work towards, I suppose, the joint assessments under the EU HTA regulation. So both the UNETA 21 work and what sort of follows on from that. So, and as with everyone, all views are my own. So, I know many of you will be aware of this, but just in case not, the EU Health Technology Assessment Regulation was. Sorry, is there a problem? Okay, thank you. Sorry, yeah. The Health Technology Assessment Regulation was introduced to, I suppose, harmonize aspects of health technology assessment around Europe, and it establishes a framework for cooperation on HTA in a number of different areas across member states. But two of the main activities that it introduces are joint clinical assessments and joint scientific consultations. So the joint clinical assessments, these are European level relative effectiveness assessments carried out jointly by multiple HTA bodies in Europe. They will be mandatory for all newly licensed medicines, but with a gradual introduction starting in 2025 with oncology products and ATMPs. So in some sense, this formalizes and builds upon the relative effectiveness assessments that were previously done voluntarily as part of UNETA. Separate to that, there's the joint scientific consultation procedure. So this is a mechanism for early scientific advice from HTA bodies in parallel with regulators, which will be open to all new medicinal products subject to some prioritization rules if there are capacity issues. This, by contrast, is a voluntary procedure. Health technology developers can participate in if they want to, and the outputs of this are non-binding and confidential. So the idea with the JSCs really is to sort of help health technology developers to prepare for, I suppose, the evidence needs for HTA, both at a European level, but also the national assessments later on. And we'll be having a talk tomorrow from Dr. Gergo Meres in NIPN about the JSCs, giving some more details about that. So I'm going to principally focus on the assessment side of things, the JCAs. Okay, so what is a JCA? Well, essentially, HTA, there are a number of components of HTA, of which relative or comparative clinical effectiveness is only one, although, of course, a major one. So this would be a relative effectiveness assessment of the product, the new medicinal product versus the relevant comparators. Importantly, it only covers this aspect of HTA. So the other components, such as the economic analysis, and the social, ethical, legal, organizational things, they remain part of the national assessment process. And this includes the cost effectiveness modeling side of things, which of course is very closely connected to treatment effectiveness. And a lot of statisticians working in HTA will be working on that as well, but that remains part of the national assessment process. So essentially, according to the regulation, the JCA has to contain a scientific analysis of relative treatment effects, and including an analysis, I suppose, of the certainty of the evidence, the strengths and the limitations. But it cannot go so far as to make value judgments. So it cannot make conclusions on added benefit of the medicinal product. This is a decision that remains with member states, because these are assessed according to different criteria, and it's a competency of member states to decide what benefits they value, and also to make final decisions on pricing and reimbursement. So it harmonizes, I suppose, this one part of HTA across Europe. In terms of how this is going to work, it is approximately going to take place in parallel with the regulatory assessment. And there are some interdependencies, and there will be a need for sharing some information between the regulators and the HTA assessors. But fundamentally, these are distinct processes that are carried out by distinct organizations, and they have different remits. So what the JCA will provide is, I suppose, a snapshot of the comparative effectiveness evidence as it exists, at the time of marketing authorization. And it will be published shortly after marketing authorization, and will be passed on to the national HTA agencies so that they can incorporate it in their decision-making process, along with the other aspects that they have to consider. So I thought I'd say a little bit about, how does this actually differ? Because, I know not everyone here would know all that much about HTA, and of course, and you might be wondering, why do we need two processes, I suppose? And it's true, of course, that, that there's considerable overlap in the assessment of clinical evidence between HTA and regulatory. But I think it's probably fair to say that the focus of at least the clinical effectiveness component of HTA is a little bit different. First of all, it is predominantly an assessment of the relative effect. So this is a bit different to risk benefit, right? So we're looking at the relative treatment effects against all potentially relevant comparators. And of course, that may go beyond comparators used in the pivotal clinical trials, if indeed there are comparators, which means there's often a greater focus on the use of evidence synthesis and particularly indirect treatment comparison. So we often go beyond original clinical studies. In addition to this, there's a considerable focus on assessing the applicability or the generalizability of clinical evidence to kind of real-world clinical practice. So this kind of step from efficacy in the tightly controlled environment of a clinical trial to effectiveness in the real world. So external validity, but it also may involve consideration of different estimands, for example, if there are things like treatment switching involved. And importantly, where benefits are expected to continue to be accrued beyond the trial follow-up period, HTA will often make, I suppose, an explicit sort of attempt to quantify the magnitude of those benefits. Fundamentally, as a scientific process, I guess, HTA is often more concerned with estimation over inference. Some of you might argue that that's a somewhat artificial distinction, but fundamentally, we're concerned with, how well does it work, as opposed to, just does it work? And of course, in many public payer systems, the price that they're willing to pay for a new medicine is directly connected to the magnitude of the clinical benefit. So this estimation becomes very, very important. And finally, then, the HTA is typically concerned with, benefits over a range of different clinical outcomes. There is a clear sort of priority on outcomes that are of direct relevance to patients. So when clinical trials are based on surrogates, again, we have to look in detail at to what extent can we predict these patient-relevant outcomes from those surrogates. Also, HTA would be concerned with outcomes that are of relevance, practical relevance to healthcare systems, things that might affect resource utilization and other parts of the decision-making process. So, of course, there's considerable overlap here with regulatory, but I think the focus is different, and we are fundamentally looking at different questions. Okay, returning, I guess, to the European assessments and how's this all going to work? Well, essentially, the joint HTA work will be overseen by the member state coordination group on HTA, which was established last year. And the associated subgroups, which were actually convened for the first time only earlier this year. And there will be subgroups on joint clinical assessments, joint scientific consultations, the identification of emerging health technologies, and importantly, the methodology subgroup, which of course will produce methodological guidance on how these assessments are to be carried out. And I guess it's really the outputs of the methodology subgroup will be of particular interest to this audience. So the coordination group will interact with the stakeholder network, which includes patient groups, NGOs, industry groups, and so on. And then the kind of secretariat and the IT side will be run by the European Commission. So at the minute, as I say, the subgroups have been convened relatively recently. And this year and next year, the work involves, I suppose, adopting the implementing acts that will actually allow these assessments to specify exactly how these assessments will take place. And also the adoption of the methodological and procedural guidance in preparation for the first assessments, which start in 2025. Obviously, that's quite close, but in fact, a lot of the groundwork has been done already. And this was one of the main aims of the UNETA 21 consortium, which was a consortium of HTA bodies. There were 13, and I think, 13, sorry. 13 involved in this sort of iteration of UNETA, but there were also previous joint actions as well. And this essentially this consortium essentially developed procedural guidelines for JSCs and JCAs. The production of some JSCs, there was planned to actually carry out some joint clinical assessments as well as part of this, although no submissions were actually received. So it's really the outputs of this have laid the groundwork for the methodological guidance to be adopted by the coordination group and also to inform the implementing act. So a lot of this work has really been done already. So what I wanted to talk about was really to summarize, I guess, some of the main UNETA 21 deliverables that were kind of published over the last 12 months and the ones that I think are of particular relevance to this audience. Obviously, those who are involved in the HTA side of things will be particularly interested in this, but actually they really apply to anyone who's involved in clinical study design as well, because it will affect things down the line. And I wanted to just briefly talk you through these particular ones and also some of the issues that came up, I guess, as part of the public consultation, to which I know a number of you were involved in responding to. Okay, so starting at the beginning, I suppose, is the guideline on the scoping process. So this is a guideline on how the scope of the joint clinical assessment is to be designed. And the scientific questions are going to be are going to be sort of posed in a PICO format. And the PICO questions will be sort of presented to the developer, health technology developer, and these will define, the evidence that needs to be submitted and also the framework of the assessment. So in the sense that, the evidence will be assessed to in the extent to which it answers the PICO questions as requested. So it is a requirement in the regulation that the JCA takes into account member states' evidence needs for HTA. And the way that is proposed to be implemented is via a PICO survey. So essentially what will happen is the assessors will receive details from the developer on the claimed indication and other details of the product. They'll set up a survey which will go out to all member states covered by the regulation. They will consider what their evidence needs would be for such a product in order to assess such a product, taking into account in particular the opinions of patients and also clinicians in that area. So then these responses will go back to the assessors and they will be consolidated as much as is possible into what is hopefully a manageable number of PICO questions. And then that consolidated sort of PICO question will be validated first of all, and then circulated to the developer in order that they can prepare the assessment. So this is how the scope is to be defined, taking into account member states' evidence needs, and in particular, the views of patients, which is really important here. So I think I'll move on then. One of the main guidelines I think that will be of interest to statisticians working in HTA is the guideline on direct and indirect comparisons. So this is the guideline that covers the assessment of various methods of evidence synthesis, including, I guess, traditional pairwise meta-analysis, indirect comparisons and network meta-analysis of randomized studies, but also the, I guess, tricky topic of obtaining relative treatment effects in disconnected evidence networks, such as from single-arm trials. So there's two guidelines here. One is, I guess, a methodological guideline, which discusses, I suppose, the methodological framework underpinning the available methods of evidence synthesis and what they can and can't do, and a practical guideline aimed at, I suppose, the assessment of the evidence synthesis component of a JCA submission. So I guess many of the methods described here will be quite familiar, and the content isn't going to be a huge surprise to people. But I guess one thing I wanted to address, because I think it's a question that has sort of come up again and again through various interactions, is, you know, what methods of evidence synthesis are applicable or are kind of usable in a JCA? Because of course, you know, we recognize the first products to be assessed are oncology, ATMPs. The evidence base, the comparative evidence base, is likely to be limited in many cases. And of course, the PICO survey means that there will not necessarily be direct comparative evidence for a lot of these questions. So taking all of this into account, our position has been that there are essentially no restrictions on the types, on the methods that can be used. Most reasonable methods can be of value in principle, provided they make reasonable assumptions and that they're targeting a relevant estimate or relevant treatment effect estimate for the PICO questions. So nothing is going to be excluded a priori. And, you know, essentially the appropriate method is really to be determined by the data and by the PICO questions. Ultimately, you know, the onus is on the health technology developer to demonstrate as best as is practically possible the validity of any analyses that they submit. Importantly, you know, it's not enough to just say that, I suppose, there are no suitable alternatives, that this makes a certain method valid by default. You know, everything will be assessed, but we have to acknowledge that, you know, we have to acknowledge the limitations here and the uncertainties of the evidence. So the scope of the joint clinical assessment is really to assess and report on the validity and the uncertainty of the results. It is not the competency of the JCA to make a final determination of whether or not something is suitable or unsuitable. That it's up to member states what level of certainty of evidence they require, what they're willing to accept. But they absolutely, whatever is needed will be assessed as part of the JCA. Wanted to say something specific about single-arm trials, of course, because, you know, this is a challenge for regulators and HTA bodies, and this is something that's come up quite a bit as well. But, you know, JCA is fundamentally a comparative assessment. So the extent to which single-arm trials contribute is via a comparison with either an external control or what you might call an unanchored indirect treatment comparison, because, you know, we're interested in relative treatment effects here. And these are, of course, fundamentally non-randomized studies and will be assessed as such. And there are often additional challenges that arise from the fact that you're combining evidence from multiple data sources. I don't have to tell anyone in this audience that, of course, such comparisons have considerable limitations compared with those based on RCT evidence, but they will be assessed, and I think, you know, they will be assessed comprehensively and fairly as part of the JCA. In terms of the advice we can, I suppose, give to health technology developers in this area, that, you know, what we have now is a mandatory assessment of comparative clinical effectiveness at a European level, and, you know, if you are considering, you know, when single-arm trials are being considered, this needs to be taken into account. You need to plan accordingly. So, you know, we often find ourselves in situations where products have been licensed on the basis of single-armed evidence, and actually, you know, no consideration has been given to obtaining comparative treatment effect estimates, and we end up with quite poor quality comparisons. You can avoid that by planning early. And the joint scientific consultation process gives a sort of an avenue to get direct advice from HTA agencies on how that can be done. Because, as I say, while RCT-based evidence is always preferable, there's also a huge spectrum of quality in terms of non-randomized comparisons, and there is still quite a bit that you can do to help by considering, I guess, target estimates, considering the data sources and the differences between studies, the potential sources of bias, pre-specification, conducting, I suppose, meaningful sensitivity analysis, and so on. But so these kind of comparisons will be assessed, I think, will be assessed fairly as part of the joint clinical assessment, but we have to acknowledge there are limitations here. Okay, moving from one controversial topic to another, guideline 4.4 is about endpoints. Okay, so this is a practical guideline which is kind of twofold. It's a guidance to member states on how they might select outcomes during the scoping process, so during the PICO survey, and also guidance to JCA assessors, I suppose, on the statistical aspects concerning the measurement and the analysis of outcomes. So some of that might be relevant to this audience as well. But focusing first, I suppose, on the big question, the selection of outcomes. I mean, fundamentally, again, the JCA cannot determine which outcomes are more important than others. This remains a member state decision. And the text in the regulation actually, explicitly says it cannot rank outcomes. So that this remains for member states. They have to select these on the basis of their national requirements for HTA for decision making. In general, our advice is that long-term patient-centered outcomes are preferable. So basically direct measurements of mortality, morbidity, and quality of life, and should be used where possible. And importantly, the identification of relevant outcomes needs to involve patients and clinicians as much as possible. Concerning surrogate outcomes specifically, it is absolutely okay for member states, of course, to request surrogate or intermediate outcomes. It is also proposed in this guideline that if a particular outcome is requested and no data or insufficient data is available, the health technology developer may present a surrogate outcome together with evidence supporting its validity. So in a hypothetical example of an AML indication where OS was requested and EFS is available, you could, it would be okay to present, for example, studies examining trial level treatment effects on EFS versus OS as supportive evidence, and that would be assessed as well as part of the JCA. So I think if you're involved in preparing these submissions, I think in many cases the outcomes that will be requested are quite predictable, and it's probably better to think about this sooner rather than later. Okay, I just briefly wanted to talk about two other guidelines which I guess are somewhat relevant to this audience. And 4.5, the title is Applicability of Evidence, although the focus of this guideline is actually predominantly on multiplicity. And I wanted to clarify something about this, that there is no proposal in this guideline that that the joint clinical assessment would revisit, I guess, the control of multiplicity in the pivotal clinical trial. It's we're not trying to redo those aspects of the regulatory assessment. But fundamentally, the scientific question of the joint clinical assessments differs. It may involve multiple studies, and it may involve, of course, evidence synthesis of multiple studies. So, there are sort of hidden sources of multiplicity there as well that need to be accounted for. It's not sensible to talk about JCA-wide multiplicity control because, I guess these evidence is used in different ways across different member states, and the scientific questions are kind of different. But nonetheless, the focus on this really is for the JCA assessors to be able to identify and report the potential sources of multiplicity. And as I say, in particular, those maybe less obvious ones that arise from that arise in the case of, say, evidence synthesis, subgroups, and so on. And finally, then, guideline 4.6, again, the contents of this probably won't surprise anyone in this audience. It's guidance on the various types of clinical study designs and the impacts on their internal and external validity. And there's also some specific guidance on the issues of validity arising in the case of platform trials, basket trials, and real-world evidence, specifically from the point of view of assessing comparative effectiveness. So the guidance here really is as part of the JCA, that standardized tools such as the Cochrane tools will be used to assess internal validity. External validity, as I said earlier, is a considerable a big issue in HTA, and something that will also be looked at, including the extent to which the submitted evidence actually answers the PICO questions. This assessment is to be performed by the JCA assessment team, and as such, the onus is really on the health technology developers to make the required information available so that can be done. So they're really the main guidelines, the main developments, I suppose, in over the last sort of 12 months in terms of the the methodological side of joint clinical assessment. So I want to just maybe wrap up with some general remarks. So as I said, the scope of the joint clinical assessment is comparative clinical effectiveness, according to the questions specified by this PICO survey developed in consultation with member states. We've tried as best as possible to propose what is a scientifically rigorous set of guidelines for the assessment, but nonetheless ones that are pragmatic in light of the likely evidence base we're going to see, particularly in the early joint clinical assessments. HTA is concerned with different questions compared to regulatory assessment, and it's not always a given that the same evidence can answer both questions. And with that in mind, I think what from a HTA perspective we would like to see is really a greater involvement of HTA bodies in shaping evidence generation. For example, there is this direct route now through the joint scientific consultation process to get early advice from HTAs, but also more general dialogue like this workshop. And I'm as I say, I'm very grateful to be invited and to be able to talk about that. So thanks for listening. And the UNEDA guidelines, they're going to be they're on the UNEDA website at least until the end of 2023, because the UNEDA 21 project is wrapping up now. As they get adopted by the HTA coordination group, they will be, I guess, move over to the corresponding website on the European Commission. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation, very informative indeed. I would like to invite EFSPI and Christine and to open up the Q&A session. First of all, are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. David Wright, AstraZeneca. Just a quick question about the second presentation, EFSPI, about the usage of the analyses. I'm just picking up on two words you used, and I just wanted to clarify you meant them. So you said the analysis that are considered relevant to the assessment will be shared to the applicant. So it's the considered relevant bit. How do you make that judgment? And why not all analyses? And then you also said the applicant might be asked to replicate the analyses in the LAQ. Shouldn't the applicant always be asked to replicate the analyses? Thanks.
No? Okay. So thanks, David. So yeah, in some instances, for example, when we receive the raw data, we might want to do some, let's say, exploratory analysis. So we might want to play a bit with the data just to understand a bit what the applicant has done. So there might be some analysis and some visualization involved, but more for exploratory reasons. So maybe this, it won't be shared. So yeah, regarding the applicant, I can just give you an example here. If, for example, one of, I don't know, let's assuming that the NCAs are performing their analysis and they might have found something, let's say, interesting, we might ask the applicant to replicate this analysis to make sure that what we have found, it's correct, let's say, or we want to make sure that both sides agree on the analysis performed. So this is what I was trying to say. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? from the
I
audience?
have one here. Sorry.
This first.
I have a mic here. Okay, Anders Gårds Rasmussen, Novo Nordisk. Thanks for some very good overviews. It's a question for David, or actually it's two questions. So first of all, can you speak maybe a little bit to the kind of capability development that is also going on at the moment, also being mindful that I guess there are lots of HTA bodies also out in Europe that doesn't necessarily have the technical capability to do these kind of assessments. And then the second question is pertaining to these methodological guidelines that UNETA 21 has prepared. As you said, now it's not very far away with the actual implementation. How will these guidelines make it over into the implementing acts? Will there be more review rounds? How will it look?
Well, could you repeat the last part of the question? Will there be?
Yeah, more review rounds in terms of, I mean, there was the review rounds of the UNETA 21 methodological guidelines. Now they will make them into the implementing acts in some shape or form. Will there be another round of public consultation for these guidelines before they make it into the legislation?
Right. So yeah, at the minute, I'll answer the second question first. Yeah. At the minute, the guidelines are basically being reviewed by the methodology subgroup. I do not, as far as I know, there is not another round of public consultation planned for these guidelines. And ultimately, timelines are incredibly tight. Now, I think that the review by the methodology subgroup I expect it will take into account the feedback from the previous public consultations during the UNETA 21 process. As for the implementing act, I genuinely don't know. I mean, that is essentially it's the European Commission that are sort of in charge of that. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that. As far as capacity building goes, yeah, this is something that's being looked at. There are, I'm trying to remember what they're called. I think technical support instruments. There is funding from the Commission, I think, to develop this. There are a number of projects being proposed. I think it's something we're going to continue to look at. I could be wrong about this, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any such sort of program that has been established for definite, but there are a number of avenues that we're looking at in terms of, I suppose, getting how the resources might be made available for that, and also the various sort of schemes. But it's absolutely something that we're looking at, and there is, as you say, a considerable variation around Europe in terms of capacity in HTA. So it's definitely an area of interest to us. Thanks.
Have some Q&A online, Annabelle?
Mm-hmm. Yep, so there's a few questions online. The first couple are related to the raw data pilot. So the first one is, since the analyses of the raw data are to be used for decision making by the CHMP, and that the application to the pilot study is voluntary, do you think there's a bias towards studies with high quality raw data applying for this pilot?
Well,
Controversial.
Maybe just to say that within the interim lessons learned, we're also collecting information on the applications that didn't make it to the pilot, but they were proposed. So either from the applicant or from the NCA. So yeah, that's what I have to respond.
Okay. And then, so the second question related to this pilot study. So I guess this is, if this is successful and the process is up and running for all submissions, could there be a chance to reduce the creation of the Section 16 listings in CSRs? That was quite a popular one.
It's something to consider, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and I think we had someone who had a hand raised, regulatory. Do you know the name? Gergo? If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Okay, so we'll move to another question. He can't unmute. I wish I could unmute. So, okay, so now a couple of questions towards David. So the first one is quite lengthy. At the time a drug enters phase 3, efficacy and safety are in no way guaranteed. By moving the development of the JCA package earlier in the development process, this cost and work effort will be encountered for all drugs, including those that ultimately will not be approved. What steps are being taken to ensure this additional cost and effort does not stop development of new drugs with high risk of success?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So that, the JCA will take place, roughly around the time of the same time as the regulatory assessment. So I wonder. So is this question, I mean, I guess sometimes, yeah, preparation for HTA doesn't take place until after marketing authorization. Is that your reading of this? Yeah, I genuinely can't answer that, I'm sorry.
Okay, so maybe you can answer this second one.
One question for Christine, and I hand over. So can you clarify your understanding of the context in which artificial intelligence methods can be used to generate external control data? Do you consider this to be artificially made data? That means AI. So that's a question for Christine.
Do I understand your question correctly, that you're asking if external data is classified as artificial intelligence, any external data, or just?
So the question says which AI methods can be used to generate external control data, and whether you consider AI data just basically just artificially made data. So the first one is about how you generate external data, and the second one about what is your understanding of AI in that context.
The short answer is I cannot answer that question. I would say it depends in what context the external data is used, and if it's, I mean, how it's generated, and if that's acceptable. I think that would depend on the context that it's used. So it's I cannot answer that question straight off. I think it might be some information regarding that in the reflection paper, but otherwise I just encourage you to join the workshop on artificial intelligence in November and see how, and then you can discuss more on the view of how we view artificial intelligence and how different types of data is generated.
Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, I have a question for EFSPI on the raw data pilot. As a statistician, of course, like probably most of them, when I hear about an interim assessment, I think about stopping for efficacy, stopping for futility, etc. But it would be good to know a little bit about that objective for that interim assessment, and if that could lead to an earlier decision-making of the CHMP.
You mean the interim pilot?
Interim pilot assessment.
No, this is just to say that the pilot was set up with a duration of 2 years, yeah. So because we're halfway there, we said that halfway there we will start collecting some interim lessons learning, yeah. This is what we meant with that, and these learnings would be on, as I said, it could be from practical aspects, technical aspects, or, if we move ahead, if we don't see any value, we can say already that we don't see any value or so. So this is what we're planning to do with the interim pilot reports, not with what you were, implying. Yeah, okay. This clarifies.
1, 2.
Is it working? Yeah. Okay. I also have a question on, there is this growing use of external control data. And I was wondering, I know it's ideally external control data will also be submitted on the individual level, individual patient level. I was wondering if there is any experience or any barriers from companies to send that external control data.
Within the context of the pilot, we are only looking at data that comes from, clinical trials. Yeah. So we haven't yet. Sorry, I see some. I thought it was for me. So if, for example, the applicant is willing to share this external data, if they have used this in the development program and they're willing to share it with us, of course, this will come with the package. But let's say this is not a priority. Yeah. I know that within the big data steering group, there are also, let's say, other projects looking more, of course, on real world evidence, data and real world data. So this is outside the scope of our clinical trials data pilot, but there are parallel activities that they're looking into real world evidence.
We have one quick question from Kit. So
it needs to be a quick question. I'm traveling back a bit because I was trying to help out with the question that David had troubles answering, because I understood it differently. I think what I understood, if we have to incorporate in phase 3 a substantial package to prepare for the assessment on relative effectiveness and subsequent steps, that increases the cost of phase 3, while we're still quite unsure whether it will be an efficacious drug and we will ever end at this stage. I think that was the question that was meant there. I have an answer, but I leave the floor to you.
I'd love to hear your answer. Okay, I understand now. Yeah, look, I can acknowledge this is a legitimate concern, right? But I mean, there are also costs associated with a failure to generate HTA relevant data in phase 3 trials, right? Because this also leads to, I suppose, delays in reimbursement. It leads to more, I suppose, negative decisions from HTA bodies. So I think that there's a cost in both senses, but I'd be really interested in hearing your answer, because it's.
I think that, but it's a more general point, that what we are now calling phase 3 used to be phase 2. If you're so unsure to answer phase 3, you're maybe not there yet.
Thank you.
I think you have a different problem. You have a different problem to assess. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had another question with a remark. I would really love to reserve the word data for actual data, where you have done something physically to get measurements, outcomes, and anything that we create artificial, in my view, is not data. It's something else. It can be used as control. You can do very smart things with this, but it's not data.
Thank you very much for that discussion. We now have 5 minutes past, so we start